Tonight, footage is circulating across every defense monitoring network on Earth, showing something Iran spent 4 decades and billions of dollars specifically designing to prevent. A mountain south of Isfahan is lit from the inside, not a crater on the surface, not an impact flash on the rock face. From within, from the tunnels and chambers and reinforced concrete galleries that Iranian engineers bored into that mountain across 40 years of classified construction, filled with ballistic missiles that physics itself was supposed to protect. The chain reaction is still going when the footage cuts. Secondary explosions. Munitions detonating inside a sealed underground space with nowhere for the pressure to go. The mountain answering back with everything stored inside it. This is not just an explosion. It is a calculation being proven wrong in real time. The calculation that underground equals safe, that enough concrete and enough rock equals immunity, that the geometry of depth defeats any weapon a conventional air campaign can deliver. That calculation died south of Isfahan when an F-15E Strike Eagle released a GBU-72, a 5,000-pound hardened penetrating munition, and the mountain that was supposed to be a permanent fortress became instead the demonstration of what happens when American penetrator technology finally catches up to the depth Iran built to defeat it. And then, 5 hours after that strike, everything got more complicated. Trump posted on Truth Social that a deal had been approved, not just at a working level, but, in his words, both in concept and great detail, by the US, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and multiple other Middle Eastern countries, and that scheduled strikes for Thursday night had been canceled as a result. Within hours, Iranian state media via IRNA published what it described as 7 main points of that deal. Trump's response to that publication, posted Friday morning, was explosive. The terms that Iran leaked out to the fake news have nothing to do with the terms that were agreed to in writing. What they said bears no relation to the truth. Very dishonorable people to deal with. With them, there is no such thing as dealing in good faith. And in the same post, their totally rebuffed drone attack last night against Indian ships leaving the Hormuz Strait is totally unacceptable. They better get their act together and fast. Indian ships, not American ships. Iranian drones fired at commercial vessels belonging to a country that has been scrupulously neutral throughout this entire 105-day conflict, in the same 24-hour window where Iranian state media was telling the world a deal had been finalized. Both drones were shot down by U.S. air and naval forces before reaching their targets. The ships continued their transit, and the IRGC Navy, in the same window, declared the Strait of Hormuz closed to all vessels, while hundreds of ships continued moving through it in real time, tracked on AIS data that anyone in the world can access. This is the most compressed, most contradictory 24 hours this entire conflict has produced. And the GBU-72 is the reason everything happening simultaneously matters as much as it does. Let's go through every piece. Start with the GBU-72 itself, because this weapon represents a specific and deliberate American response to a specific Iranian engineering problem. And understanding the weapon is understanding why tonight's strike is different from every previous bunker buster employment in this conflict. The Defense Watch describes the GBU-72 Advanced 5K Penetrator as a next-generation precision-guided bunker buster developed specifically to destroy hardened and deeply buried targets, providing improved penetration capability over older systems, including the GBU-28, intended for use against fortified underground facilities, command bunkers, weapon storage sites, and protected infrastructure. To understand why that improvement matters, you have to understand what came before it. The GBU-28, the 4,000 to 5,000 pound laser-guided bunker buster that has been in U.S. service since the 1991 Gulf War, used in the 2024 Hezbollah headquarters strike, and throughout this conflict uses a Tritonal AFX-757 explosive fill and an impact with time delay detonation mechanism. It can penetrate significant depths of reinforced concrete and packed earth. But Iran's deepest facilities, the chambers protecting the most sensitive elements of its ballistic missile program, were engineered specifically to a standard that the GBU-28 can degrade but not reliably destroy in a single pass. This is not a deficiency in Iranian planning. It is, as the original analysis put it, a design success, a facility that can absorb GBU-28 impacts and continue functioning. The GBU-72 was built to turn that design success into a design failure, a hardened penetrator, casing engineered to maintain structural integrity through the impact with rock and reinforced concrete that would deform a conventional bomb body before it reached detonation depth, paired with a delayed fuse that activates after penetration rather than on impact, so the warhead travels through the mountain and detonates at the depth where the facility's critical infrastructure actually sits, not at the surface where the hardening is thickest. The footage from south of Isfahan tonight shows it reached the room. The chain reaction tells you what was in it. The Isfahan underground missile complex itself has a documented history in this conflict that makes tonight's strike the culmination of a much longer story. Operation Midnight Hammer, the original June 2025 strike that opened the broader confrontation, targeted 3 facilities: Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. The Stanford FSI analysis of that operation noted that 7 B-2 Spirit bombers each, carrying 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, struck Fordo and Natanz, while a U.S. Navy submarine launched more than 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles against surface infrastructure targets, specifically at Isfahan, meaning Isfahan's underground complex was not the primary target of the original 30,000-pound MOP strikes. It absorbed a surface infrastructure cruise missile attack, while the GBU-57s went to Fordo and Natanz. The CSIS report that Fox News covered in the aftermath raised exactly the question that tonight's strike answers: whether even the 30,000-pound GBU-57 MOPs were sufficient to fully destroy Iran's most hardened facilities, or whether the depth and construction of these sites meant that even America's heaviest conventional penetrator could degrade but not destroy. That uncertainty, whether any conventional weapon could reach the deepest chambers, is the exact uncertainty the GBU-72's design and tonight's deployment was built to resolve. And the broader pattern across this conflict has been one of incremental penetration. ISIS, the Institute for Science and International Security, documented in March 2026 that the Taliban 2 facility at Parchin showed 3 large bunker buster penetration holes entering directly into the area, believed to house a high explosive containment vessel for nuclear weapons development testing. Each strike across this conflict has been mapping, testing, and refining the targeting picture against Iran's underground architecture. Tonight's GBU-72 strike at Isfahan is the application of everything that mapping produced against the specific facility, described in the competitor's original reporting as the heart of Iran's largest ballistic missile assembly and production ecosystem, that had absorbed close to 20 separate bunker buster strikes from B-2s, B-52s, and F-15s across this conflict, and kept producing missiles the next morning. Tonight, it didn't. Now to the deal chaos, because the sequence here is genuinely one of the most remarkable 24-hour stretches of diplomatic whiplash in this entire conflict, and every piece of it is independently confirmed across multiple outlets. On Thursday night, Trump announced in the Oval Office and on Truth Social that he had canceled scheduled strikes against Iran because talks have been brought to the highest level of Iranian leadership and approved, describing the memorandum of understanding as approved both in concept and great detail by the U.S., Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and multiple other Middle Eastern countries. He also said in the Oval Office that the Strait of Hormuz would be reopened as soon as the deal is signed. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi posted on X that the U.S. and Iran have never been closer to finalizing a deal ending the war. That was Thursday night, and it represented by any measure the most significant diplomatic statement of the entire 105-day conflict. Then, overnight, IRNA, Iran's official state news agency, published what it described as the 7 main points of the deal, including the detail, per Mehr News Agency, that Iran's ballistic missile program and its support for proxy groups like Hezbollah would not be included in the negotiations. And by Friday morning, everything had inverted. Trump posted that the leaked terms bear no relation to the truth, called the Iranian negotiators very dishonorable people, and declared there is no such thing as dealing in good faith with them. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance posted on X to dismiss what he called fake information regarding the deal, stating explicitly that Iran will not receive cash and that no funds are being released simply for signing an agreement, directly contradicting whatever financial terms IRNA's 7 points had described. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz posted that Israel expects Trump to uphold the principle of preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons and additional principles in the realm of missiles and terrorist proxies, and vowed that Israel will not withdraw its forces from Lebanon, Syria, or Gaza. And in the middle of all of this, between Thursday night's deal announcement and Friday morning's complete rhetorical reversal, Iran fired drones at Indian commercial ships, leaving the Strait of Hormuz. The Indian ships dimension deserves its own full treatment because it is, in many ways, the most operationally and diplomatically revealing single data point of the entire 24 hours. India's Ministry of External Affairs summoned the deputy mission chief at the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi on Friday, not over the Iranian drone attack, but over what India described as continuing attacks by U.S. naval forces on commercial vessels carrying Indian mariners in the Gulf of Oman after 3 Indian sailors were killed on June 10th when a U.S. strike hit a tanker, identified in subsequent reporting as the MT Setabello near Oman, transiting the region as part of the ongoing blockade enforcement campaign. So in the span of roughly 48 hours, a U.S. strike on a blockade-running tanker killed 3 Indian nationals. India formally protested to the United States over it, And then Iranian drones attacked separate Indian commercial vessels leaving the strait, drones that U.S. air and naval forces shot down before they reached their targets, with the Indian ships continuing their transit unharmed. India, a country that has been diplomatically neutral throughout this entire conflict, one of the largest buyers of Gulf oil, and a nation now caught in the crossfire from both the American blockade enforcement and the IRGC's retaliatory drone operations, has had its nationals killed by American strikes and its commercial vessels attacked by Iranian drones within the same week. Trump's framing of the Indian ship attack as totally unacceptable, while his own blockade enforcement operations killed 3 Indian sailors days earlier, is the kind of asymmetry that India's diplomatic protest is specifically registering. For the broader analysis, though, the operationally significant fact is this. While Iranian diplomats were telling the world a deal had never been closer, and while Trump was publicly describing the deal as approved in concept in great detail by half the regional powers in the Middle East, IRGC drone operators launched an attack on the commercial shipping of a neutral third country in the same waterway that Iran's own naval command was simultaneously declaring closed to all vessels. And that brings us to the Strait of Hormuz closure declaration, which has now become, across this entire conflict, the single most reliable real-time indicator of the gap between what the IRGC says and what is physically true. The pattern is, by this point, completely established. Iran first declared the strait closed back on March 4th. It briefly declared the strait open during an April ceasefire window, then reversed within 24 hours. A self-styled Persian Gulf Strait Authority issued its own closure notice in early June, which CENTCOM rebutted directly with an infographic stating hundreds of ships had successfully transited in recent weeks. And now, in the same 24-hour window as the GBU-72 strike, the deal announcement, the deal repudiation, and the Indian ship drone attack, the IRGC Navy declared the strait closed to all vessels, and any passage would be targeted, while hundreds of ships continued transiting through corridors that CENTCOM and Secretary Hegseth have both confirmed the U.S. Navy and Air Force are actively maintaining, visible in real time on AIS tracking data that any shipping company on Earth can access. The IRGC's domestic audience, sealed behind an internet blackout, receives the closure declaration through state media with no access to the contradicting data. The international audience receives both the declaration and, within hours, the satellite imagery, the CENTCOM statements, and the live vessel transit numbers that make the declaration's falsity not a matter of interpretation, but a matter of arithmetic. Ships per hour transiting a waterway the IRGC has announced is closed. That gap, quantifiable, real-time, and now repeated for the better part of 3 months, is the most consistent storyline this conflict has produced. And tonight, it happened in the same hours as a deal collapse and a strike on the most hardened facility Iran has left. So what does all of this tell you about the actual structure of Iranian decision-making on June 11th to 12th, 2026? Walk through the sequence in order. The GBU-72 strikes the Isfahan complex. 5 hours later, Trump announces a deal approved, in his words, both in concept and great detail by the US, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, with strikes canceled as a result. Hours after that, Iranian state media publishes deal terms that Trump says bear no relation to what was actually agreed in writing. In the same window, the IRGC Navy declares the strait closed to all vessels, a declaration immediately and measurably contradicted by live shipping data. And in that same window, Iranian drones attack the commercial vessels of a neutral third country, India, and are shot down by U.S. forces before reaching their targets. Every single one of these things happened within roughly 24 hours of each other. There are only a few ways to read that sequence, and all of them point in the same direction. Either the faction within the Iranian system that communicated approval of the deal to Trump's negotiating channel does not have the authority to bind the IRGC's operational commanders, the same commanders who declared the strait closed and who, whether directly or through proxy elements, launched the drone attack on Indian shipping. Or the deal that was approved in concept in great detail was approved on terms that excluded exactly the things: the ballistic missile program, the proxy network support for groups like Hezbollah, that IRNA's 7 points reportedly described as off the table, meaning Trump's negotiators believed they had secured commitments on those issues that Tehran's own state media is now publicly contradicting. Either way, the conclusion is the same. There is no single Iranian decision-making entity right now whose word, communicated to Washington, reliably predicts what IRGC operational commanders will do in the following 24 hours. The GBU-72 strike on Isfahan is a concrete, verifiable, satellite imagery confirmable fact. The Iranian command structure's coherence is not, and right now it is the less tractable of the two problems facing the diplomatic track. Here's why the GBU-72 strike matters so much for that coherence problem specifically, beyond the immediate destruction of whatever was stored in that mountain. Iran's ballistic missile inventory, which began this conflict somewhere in the range of 2,000 to 3,000 operational systems across multiple categories, per most pre-war Western estimates, has been reduced, according to Trump's own public statements and subsequent strike damage, to a small single-digit percentage of that original total, with the production infrastructure at Kojer, Sharud, Parchin, and Hakimiyeh assessed by the Washington Post and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies as severely damaged to the point that reconstitution is not realistically achievable on any near-term timeline, particularly given the well-documented planetary mixer bottleneck for solid fuel production that Iran has not solved. The Isfahan complex that the GBU-72 struck tonight represented, per the analysis of this conflict's targeting pattern, both remaining stockpile and remaining production and assembly capacity in one location, the insurance policy underneath the insurance policy. An Iran whose ballistic missile arsenal is intact, even in reduced numbers, can use the density and dispersal of that arsenal to protect its nuclear infrastructure from sustained interdiction. Every air defense battery and every missile site the U.S. has to account for is a resource diverted from striking the uranium directly. An Iran whose production and major storage capacity at the facility level has just been destroyed by a weapon specifically engineered to reach what previous weapons cannot reconstitute that protective density on any timeline relevant to the current negotiations. That is the strategic significance of tonight's strike that exists independently of whatever happens with the deal. The GBU-72 did not just destroy missiles. It destroyed the production and assembly infrastructure that made replacing those missiles possible, at the one facility that 20 previous bunker buster strikes across this conflict had not been able to fully reach. Here's the honest assessment of where this leaves the diplomatic track as of June 12, 2026. Trump's Thursday night announcement, a deal approved in concept in great detail by the US, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, with strikes canceled, is, on its face, the most significant diplomatic statement of this entire 105-day conflict. And it should not be dismissed simply because the following 24 hours were chaotic. But the IRNA leak, Trump's furious repudiation of it, J.D. Vance's public clarification that no cash transfers are part of any deal, Israeli Defense Minister Katz's public insistence on non-negotiable red lines regarding Iran's missiles and proxies, the IRGC's straight closure declaration, and the Iranian drone attack on Indian shipping, all of it happening within the same 24-hour window as the deal announcement, tells you that whatever was approved in concept in great detail by the parties Trump named has not yet been communicated in a form that Iran's own state media accurately understands, or that the IRGC's operational commanders feel bound by. For a deal to hold, it needs an Iranian counterparty whose commitments are honored by the IRGC's regional commanders, the same commanders who, throughout this conflict, have demonstrated decentralized operational autonomy that has repeatedly produced actions disconnected from whatever the civilian diplomatic apparatus is simultaneously telling Qatari and other intermediaries. The GBU-72 strike on Isfahan happened 5 hours before the deal announcement, meaning the American military campaign did not pause in anticipation of a deal that turned out, within 24 hours, to be disputed by both sides regarding its actual terms. That sequencing, strike first, announce deal second, watch the deal fracture third, may itself be the most honest signal in this entire 24-hour period about how much confidence the American side actually had in the deal's durability at the moment it was announced. The mountain south of Isfahan lit from the inside. 5 hours later, a deal was announced. Within hours after that, Iranian drones were in the air over the Strait of Hormuz, headed towards ships that have nothing to do with this conflict. And the IRGC was telling its own population that the waterway those ships were sailing through does not exist as an open passage. Both things happened. Only one of them is true. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop your prediction in the comments. Does this deal survive the weekend, or does the next mountain light up first? Watch the next video right here. Before we close, 3 more threads need full treatment because they connect tonight's events to the larger arc of this conflict and to what comes next. The first is the fake bunker problem, a genuinely significant intelligence countermeasure that Iran has been employing and that directly affects how confident anyone should be about what tonight's strike actually destroyed. Decoy targeting is not new. It has been standard air defense doctrine since the Second World War. What makes it consequential in this specific context is the cost asymmetry involved. Every GBU-72 is an expensive, limited inventory weapon. If Iran can construct surface-visible structures designed to mimic the thermal, electromagnetic, and pattern-of-life signatures of active underground missile storage facilities, it can force the expenditure of America's most advanced penetrator munitions against empty rock, defending its real facilities through geological deception rather than active air defense, which it largely no longer has. The counter to this is the months of persistent ISR coverage that continued throughout the ceasefire period even when strikes paused. RQ-4, global hawks, satellite constellations, and signals intelligence collection, building a pattern of life picture that distinguishes active facilities from decoys through vehicle traffic, personnel movement, thermal signatures over time, and electromagnetic emissions that a static decoy cannot replicate convincingly across months of observation. Tonight's footage, the chain reaction of secondary explosions, munitions detonating in sequence inside a sealed space, is itself the confirmation that whatever ISR-driven targeting picture led to this specific GBU-72 employment was correct. A decoy does not produce secondary explosions. An empty mountain does not light from the inside. The footage is the verification. The second thread is the Senate Armed Services Committee's green light for a robotics and autonomous systems combatant command at the 4-star level, a development that, on its surface, seems disconnected from tonight's events, but is in fact the institutional acknowledgement of exactly what this conflict has demonstrated. Across 105 days, this war has produced a Saronic Corsair autonomous surface vessel conducting the first robot rescue of downed American aircrew in military history, directed energy and APKWS systems, converting the cost economics of drone defense, an ISR architecture built from autonomous sensor platforms that fed the targeting package for tonight's GBU-72 strike, and a SADE kill chain, Growler, Wild Weasel, F-15E, that depends on real-time autonomous sensor fusion to operate inside contested airspace. A 4-star command dedicated to robotics and autonomous systems is not a response to a hypothetical future threat. It is the recognition that the battlefield this conflict has been fought on, the Strait of Hormuz, the underground chambers south of Isfahan, the electromagnetic spectrum over the Persian Gulf, is already substantially a robotic and autonomous battlefield. And that procurement, doctrine, and training need to formally catch up to what operational reality has already validated. The mountain that lit from inside tonight was found, confirmed, and targeted by systems that this new combatant command will be responsible for scaling across every future theater. The third and final thread is the question of what approved in concept in great detail by 5 governments actually means if Iran's own state media cannot accurately report it within hours. There's a structural possibility here that deserves consideration. It may be that the deal Trump described was genuinely approved by the regional parties he named, the US, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, as a framework for what comes next, but that the specific civilian-level Iranian negotiators who communicated acceptance to that framework either lacked the authority to bind the IRGC on the missile and proxy provisions, or communicated something in the room that does not match what IRNA subsequently published. J.D. Vance's immediate and specific clarification, no cash, economic benefits, flow only after Iran meets its obligations, reads less like a negotiator explaining a complex deal to the public, and more like a government making absolutely certain that no Iranian faction can claim a financial concession was made that was not actually made. That is the behavior of a government that anticipated exactly this kind of leak and repudiate cycle and pre-positioned its response. Whether that means the underlying framework survives this 24-hour cycle intact, with the IRNA leak treated as an Iranian internal audience messaging problem, rather than evidence the deal itself collapsed, or whether the leak reveals that the actual gap between what Washington thinks was agreed and what Tehran's negotiators believe was agreed is unbridgeable is the question the next 72 hours will answer. What is not in question is the mountain. It lit from the inside. The chain reaction is in the footage. And whatever comes next in the diplomatic track, the production and storage capacity that the IRGC was counting on to fund its long game from inside that specific mountain no longer exists. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, drop your prediction in the comments, watch the next video right here. One final piece of context that's worth sitting with, because it's the through line connecting tonight's events to everything that has come before in this conflict. There's a recurring pattern in how this war has moved between escalation and de-escalation, and tonight fits that pattern almost perfectly. Strikes happen, damage is severe. Within hours, a diplomatic opening is announced, sometimes by Trump directly, sometimes through intermediaries. The opening generates immediate hope, immediate market reaction, immediate relief in capitals from Doha to Brussels to New Delhi. And then, within another short window, something happens that either contradicts the opening, undermines its credibility, or reveals that the parties describing the opening do not share an understanding of what was actually agreed. This has happened with ceasefire announcements before. It happened with ceasefire violations before. And tonight, it happened with a deal that was, by Trump's own description, approved in concept and great detail by 5 governments, repudiated by the same president less than 24 hours later, accompanied by an Iranian naval declaration that the strait is closed while it demonstrably is not, and punctuated by a drone attack on a neutral country's shipping in the same waterway. If you've been following this conflict since February 28th, none of this should feel unfamiliar. What is different tonight is the GBU-72, Every previous cycle of escalation, de-escalation contradiction happened against a backdrop where Iran's deepest, most protected military infrastructure remained intact, an asset that gave whatever faction controlled it leverage independent of what civilian negotiators said in Doha or Doha-adjacent channels. Tonight, for the first time, that specific asset, the production and storage capacity inside the Isfahan mountain that had survived roughly 20 previous strikes, does not exist anymore. The cycle may repeat again this weekend, or it may not, but it will repeat against a different set of facts on the ground than every previous cycle did. The mountain lit from the inside. That part is not in dispute, not subject to leak and repudiate, not contestable on Truth Social. Everything else about tonight is still being negotiated, contradicted, and renegotiated in real time. Subscribe, turn on notifications, drop your prediction below. Watch the next video right here. And let's close with a human cost dimension that gets lost in the strategic analysis, but that deserves acknowledgement. The 3 Indian seafarers killed on June 10th aboard the MT Setabello, and the broader pattern of civilian and third-party casualties this conflict has produced as it has ground through its 105th day. India's formal diplomatic protest over those deaths is not a minor footnote to the geopolitical chess game. It represents one of the first instances of a major non-combatant power directly and publicly confronting the United States over casualties from blockade enforcement operations. India is not a party to this conflict in any sense. It is a massive buyer of Gulf energy, a country whose merchant marine workforce staffs a significant fraction of the tankers that move through the Strait of Hormuz every single day, and a government that has tried to maintain studied neutrality between Washington and Tehran throughout this entire war. That neutrality has not protected its citizens. 3 dead from an American strike on a blockade-running tanker. 2 ships targeted by Iranian drones in the same week. The summoning of a U.S. deputy mission chief in New Delhi is a quiet diplomatic action by the standards of what else happened in these 24 hours, but it represents something that should not be overlooked. The costs of this conflict are no longer confined to the 2 primary belligerents and their immediate regional partners. They are now landing on the citizens of countries that have done nothing but try to keep commerce moving through a waterway that both Washington and Tehran are simultaneously claiming to control, to have opened, and to have closed, sometimes within the same 24-hour news cycle. The mountain lit from the inside. The deal was announced and disputed. The strait was declared closed while remaining open. And 3 Indian sailors are dead, with their government now formally on record protesting to the United States about it. All of that happened in roughly 24 hours. Subscribe, turn on notifications, drop your prediction below. Watch the next video right here. So where does that leave us heading into the weekend? Trump said earlier in the week that a deal could be signed this weekend. That timeline has not been formally withdrawn, even amid Friday morning's furious repudiation of the leaked terms. Araghchi's Thursday night statement that the 2 sides have never been closer has not been publicly retracted by Iran either, even as Iron is 7 points drew Trump's anger. It is entirely possible that what we are watching is not a collapse of the deal, but the messy, public version of exactly the kind of last-mile haggling that happens before any major agreement is signed, both sides positioning publicly for their domestic audiences, while the actual document continues moving towards signature behind the scenes. It is also entirely possible that the IRNA leak and the Indian ship drone attack are evidence that the IRGC's operational and informational apparatus is not aligned with whatever the Iranian negotiating team in Doha believes it has agreed to, and that the weekend signing Trump described on Thursday night will not happen on schedule, if at all. Both of those readings are consistent with everything we know as of right now. What is not ambiguous is the mountain. Subscribe, turn on notifications, drop your prediction in the comments, deal this weekend or not. Watch the next video right here.